There is a number that should make every leader and every board member very uncomfortable. $140 billion a year is spent globally on leadership development. And yet, over the same period, engagement has declined steadily. Trust and confidence in leaders sits at an all-time low, around 20%. And yet the response to that data is almost universally to then spend more money on training. My guest today has a different diagnosis entirely. The problem is not the people. It's not their capability or their motivation or even the mindset. It's the system around them, the accumulated friction that makes capable, experienced, committed people spend their days rowing a boat through Treacle. Today we're going to talk about what that friction actually looks like, how to find it, and what disappears when you remove it. I am Maartje van Krieken, founder of the Chaos Games Consulting and host of the Business Emergency Room, the podcast for leaders navigating volatility, complexity, and organizational chaos. Every episode, I bring you battle-tested frameworks, honest practitioner conversations, and the kind of straight talk that does not make it into most boardrooms. Whether you're in the middle of a crisis, coming out of one, or smart enough to want to avoid the next one, you are in the right place. Let's get into it. My guest today spent years leading people in environments where friction is not an inconvenience. It costs lives. The British Army, European and Middle East operations, and over hundreds of people under his command in situations where the difference between a clear system and a broken one is not a missed target, but unfortunately a body count. He took that discipline into the corporate world and built a global practice around it, working with organizations like Bank of America and Samsung and Walmart, and then burned out completely and lost the job and the relationship and the home in quick succession. But what came out of that is a methodology built on one observation that most leadership development completely ignores as part of that development and training. Your managers are not necessarily the problem. The system around them is, and the interface there too. Jimmy Burroughes, welcome to the Business Emergency Room.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Excited about having you here. As you all know, I love where is the intercept where there is leadership practices from high pressure environments, like in your case, military experience, are brought into the business world, because I think that cross-fertilization is very powerful. And that's, of course, the intersect where you sit. You measure success by escalations down, meetings fewer, and decisions faster, not by how many people completed a program or how many coaching hours were logged, etc. Why is that the right measurement? And what does it tell you about where the real problem actually sits?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the world of leadership development has got a little bit lost and are focusing on what I call happy metrics. It's the, how many people went through this course? Great. So we immersed a lot of people in some learning. What did people enjoy it? Well, great. So it was a nice time. None of that affects bottom line results in a business. And I think where we differ from leadership development businesses, why we focus on business performance, is because we want your business to perform better. We want to make it hum. And the challenges, I think, of the last 25 years is that leadership development has had an increasingly lower return on investment. We know this because the engagement statistics that we look at globally show a steady decline over the last 20 years, especially since COVID. It's gone down even faster, but before that it was declining. We see leadership capability as the top three priorities for most Fortune CEOs, and yet we spend over $140 billion a year developing leaders for seemingly no gain. And trust and confidence in leaders in organizations is at an all-time low in the sort of 20% range. 26%, I think. So we've got to do something different. And so we're focusing on how is what we're doing making a difference to your business, to your bottom line, but also are the managers of the people who are involved in the work that we do seeing a difference in them? Are we actually seeing more time spent solving the problems at the right level, at the right salary level, at the right capability level? Or are our managers down in the weeds working on tactical stuff that their team should be doing? Which means that our executives and our senior leaders are having to come down and solve the management fires. These are all things that slow a business down. And I think about it as a perfect example from last night, writing for a construction business. A proposal that we were sending through, and their conversation was around the cost of working with us. And I said, well, what's the cost of your executive not doing executive stuff for the next 2 years? If they're solving management level problems, which are in the tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars range, they're missing the $1 million opportunities. So what's that going to cost your business in terms of opportunity? And so that's where really we're focused. Our focus is different to leadership development. It's understanding that leaders and managers have a lot of capability, but they're rowing a rowing boat through treacle, and that's what's causing the problem. So we've got to focus our energy and work on that, which then starts to shift the business metrics.
When friction has become kind of the operating model, what do you see? What is the first things that you typically always see when you walk into these organizations before anybody's told you anything? What are some of the typical symptoms and signals?
Yeah, that's such an interesting place to explore. So over the course of the last 10 years or so, we've identified 43 friction points. Every organization that we've been into has kind of 10 to 15 of those are fairly visible. And I would say 90% of organizations have kind of 6 that we see every single time. And the things that we would see are things like everybody's really busy all the time, but the business isn't really going anywhere. So we've got people working all the hours that God sends, managers in meetings all day, people working as hard as they can on projects, multiple projects being done at the same time, and everybody's exhausted, and nothing's really happening. Maybe their business results are flat, engagement is starting to sink, employee turnover is starting to go up. Productivity per capita is down. We're seeing revenue per head go down. There's all these little things that you can go in and look at in terms of the business metrics and go, I wonder what's going on here. And so we take that back to the people side. And it tends to be things like, where do I put my time and energy when everything's urgent and important? Suddenly my Boston matrix doesn't work because everything's in the top right-hand corner. So I need some way of looking at that. Why can't my team just solve their own problems? Why am I always having to dive in and do it? Why can I never get any work done? Because I'm always being interrupted. These are the sort of 43 friction things that we see. They're very practical, tactical issues that get in the way of the strategic value being unlocked. So when I go into an organization, I generally go in with two lenses. First of all, we're going to talk to the executive team about what's frustrating them and why aren't they getting the progress they want. And we're also assessing, are they really committed to this change, or is it lip service? People are really important in our business, but my goodness, if you need to work 75 hours a day to get stuff done, then so be it. That's the cost of doing business. If I'm seeing that, then there's some concerns. But also going and talking into the mid-level managers that we work, they're reporting into GMs, reporting into heads of, reporting into SVPs, and saying, what are you struggling with? What are the issues here? And we hear the same things again and again. I've mentioned a couple of them, but a couple more. If my boss would just give me clarity, then I could get on with it. I seem to spend all my time firefighting. I can never get to the important stuff. We hear these same phrases all the time, and they're the signals and signs that they're the frustrations that managers have.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
And what you're saying, frustration is also a symptom that I pick up on a lot too, right? If you just get people why, right? Or if only kind of statements. But then I also hear you clearly say, unfortunately, there's people who just want the questions to go away. And then we're really looking for those who are willing to say, hey, those are symptoms of something else, right? And But it's typically not, I'm assuming, what people say, is it?
No.
How does that then translate to hearing those frustrations or hearing those statements to actually figuring out where the issues really are?
Well, I think the root cause of the issues is kind of threefold. The first one is that we as a society are really good at reinforcing the working harder and longer is the solution to everything mentality. So, and we're taught this from school, right? You know, when you're in primary school, if you work hard, then you get good exam results. If you work hard, you'll get into a great university. If you work harder and longer at university, you'll get a better grade, and then you'll get a better job. And then if you work really hard and long at work, you get a promotion and a bonus and a pay rise. So we have conditioned ourselves over a period of time to believe that working harder and longer is the answer. And it is until it isn't. And so when you reach the dizzy heights of managing managers, actually the game changes quite significantly. And people don't realize this. In fact, more than half of leaders never realize this, that the job changes from being essentially the principal violinist in the orchestra, the best performer, the expert, the one with all the answers, to the conductor of the orchestra. You're bringing the right people together, and you're moving the instruments in the right pieces at the right time to create beautiful sound. And to solve the friction and the issues. So what tends to happen is we see organizations who are struggling with all these symptoms just working harder and longer to get through it. And then they'll do something like, why don't we bring in a high performance teams expert who can really, get us going? And that's awesome. And high performance teams experts generally say, let's just dial everything up to 11. And by setting bigger goals and being more ambitious and restructuring the fat out of the system, we'll create high performing teams. And they're not paying attention to the fact that the problem isn't actually the people in the business. It's the system that the business is running on. And that manifests itself in the management layer. So we come in and say, well, where's the system broken? What are the problems that are getting in the way of your people performing? Because if we can fix those problems, they're smart, capable, motivated, driven people who are, say, in this rowing boat that's trying to row through Treacle with an anchor chain attached to the boat. If we can just enable them and give them the ability to do their best work, everything else will fix itself. And you'll see the results almost immediately. We tend to see results within the first 2 weeks. And then over a period of time, they obviously exponentially grow. But the reason I think why, to get back to your question, why are these symptoms something that we're not dealing with? I think it's because we're conditioned mentally to not, and we've developed leadership programs that just throw more training at people and more stuff at people when the people don't need more, they need to actually have less.
Yeah, and that also assumes that there is a standard approach that would tackle all of these. But the fact that you say that you have a list of well over 40 factors, and that you're actually only saying, because sometimes people say, oh, and all of these apply to everybody, but you're actually saying, well, there's 6 or 10 that we maybe see systemically, and there's a lot of variation in there, which immediately suggests that there is not a cookie cutter solution, right? But I would think that some of the principles are more universally true, and one of the ones that you your work also referred to is high escalation rates,
yeah,
and or de-escalation. So can we take that one as an example? What is the challenge around high escalation rate? What does that signal, and what is the reverse there that really should be happening?
Yeah, escalations are really interesting. So let me give you an example of a sort of a realistic scenario. Working with a guy called Martin. Martin, at about 4:30 in the afternoon, a truck turns up at his warehouse, and he sees that it's got the wrong stuff on for unloading. So he knows the answer. He needs to send the truck away. But if he sends the truck away, there's going to be a delay of the processing of the stock, and it's going to affect tomorrow morning's outflow. But he knows the answer. But what he does instead is he calls his boss up and says, "What do you think we should do, boss?" And the boss says, "Well, send the truck away." But it took him 40 minutes to get hold of his boss. So now it's gone 5 o'clock. Truck driver wants to go because his hours are over. Warehouse is starting to close down. So inevitably, we've got a delay either way. When Martin knew the answer immediately. And this is one of the, it's a very common scenario. I already knew the answer, but I called my boss. Or I had to wait for the boss to be available to answer my email, to have a meeting with me, whatever it might be. So we've got a time cost immediately built into that. And so I go to the boss and I'm like, so, hey, Martin called you. What's going on here? He said, I just wish Martin would make decisions. And I said, well, why do you think he's not making decisions? I don't know. And I said, well, when have you ever stopped, essentially criticized or given Martin a hard time for making a decision? He said, oh, well, actually, yeah, he's screwed up a few times. So now I just get him to check with me. Okay. So that decision, that half-made decision of you need to check with me, doesn't have any quantification. So, for example, if it's a thing that's going to cost you $100 to fix, just get it done. If it's going to cost $1,000, come to me. That's a quantification. If it's something that you can do in 5 minutes, get it done. If it's going to take more than 2 hours, come to me and let's talk it out. That's a quantification. Equally, giving people the latitude of their role and responsibility is a really key kind of concept. So Martin is perfectly entitled and experienced enough to make that choice on his own. But because he's been shot down a couple of times by his boss for making the wrong decision, or a perceived wrong decision, Martin's now thinks it's safer to come to his boss every single time. And his boss is slammed. His boss is overrun with people coming to him, just checking on things that they already know the answers to. So how do we solve this? First piece, quantification. So give people, we use a conversation called the roles conversation. And the L in roles is leadership, latitude, and limits. So what are you in charge of? How much can you decide on your own? And what can you not decide on your own? And let's get really clear on those. So you've got, $100 worth of spending authority to make a client happy, or you've got, if it takes half an hour to fix it, just get it done. You've got that latitude. Equally, you've got limits. You are not allowed to decide these. We need to talk about those together, or you need to bring them to me with a suggestion. You're giving clarity to the people, and trying to make sure that if somebody is responsible for doing a job, give them the responsibility of making the decisions that go alongside that job so they don't need to escalate, and accept that people are going to graze their knees. And ideally, you get them grazing their knees in low stakes environments, which means you need to start doing this with people earlier in their career. So by the time they get to manager of manager level and GM level, they've grazed their knees enough times, they've got experience to make better choices and better decisions, versus what we're seeing now, which is executives who have been protected all through their careers, haven't had to make tough decisions. And so when they make the poor decision at a senior level, the consequence is much greater. And that escalates even further.
Yeah, and I think it's also a culture, right? Not just having the practice, but having that clarity at all levels, and knowing with a new role, there's different rules, but it's that knowing that others next to you also have that clarity, right? And that they will escalate or not to you, but appropriately. I love the example that you bring up, because it ties back so well to your earlier statement around some of that. If you just go for our typical standard high performance improvement programs or whatever, you flesh out the situation where there are decisions and it's maybe a matrix organization and it's just not well defined which decision is made. But in your case or your example, that was clear, but then it changed because of previous performance or somebody made a comment. So somebody now, because of behavior that happened or situational stuff, has now changed that system, right? And so that friction is, but that then stays, right? I think if we think now about our own works, we can name examples like that, where there's things that have slipped into our ways of working that come from situational stuff that you don't catch if you just try to manage the system as it was predefined, but doesn't actually operate, right?
Yeah. And, there's some really good science around this, without getting into kind of super nerdy zone. But we're evolutionarily programmed to avoid risk, because if you were a monkey that was like, oh, I wonder what happens if I put my head inside a tiger's mouth. Monkey didn't survive to breed. So the monkey that ran away from the tiger got to survive. And so that has continued and perpetuated through our evolution. And so now what we have is a situation in the corporate workplace, whether it's operational or in an office, where people are risk averse. So, oh, I got told off once before for making a decision, so now I won't make a decision. Or when I made a decision, I was hauled over the coals and embarrassed in front of other people. So I'll just go and check with my boss. And my boss is saying, we can't afford to be wrong. So just make sure you check with me before you do anything. This is really high stakes client relationship. So I'll get involved and help you. These are these little micro moments that are risk aversion, when actually, it's that risk aversion that's causing the overload for many leaders and is dragging senior leaders back into, they say, these operational problems and operational leaders back into tactical problems, because we're too risk averse to just say, actually, let's have a really clear conversation. You can decide this. This is your bit. You go do it, and we'll live with the consequences.
Hey, Jimmy, this whole conversation so far, you've brought up several times that how our gut reaction is to just add more time, add another layer of reviews or processes or optimization. But what you're really putting out there is that we should be subtracting. And yeah, I think all of us who've been ever in that space know that feels really hard to make that turning to saying, because that's also why prioritization seems to be so hard, right? And then, okay, we're now going to add an initiative, what's coming off the plate. And how often does that conversation strand in nothing being taken off the plate, right? So what is your secret trick? What is your trick to help organizations and people see that really needs to happen, and to help them make those first few, because I'm assuming they're harder than the next ones,
really
right?
hard.
So how do we get there?
Yeah, and you bring up such a great point. We love in the workplace to add complexity and to be busy, because if it's hard, then you must be smart. And if you're really busy, you must be important, because working harder and longer is the answer to everything, right? Until it isn't, as I said before.
I want to briefly, in that context, you've written also some books in this space, one of which being Escaping the Multitasking Trap, right, around the cost of multitasking. Can we briefly touch on that? Because is there also something there to do in this friction in the continued switching that happens when you're in a multitasking environment?
This is an interesting one. So the multitasking trap was written on the back of a project I did with a hospitality and gambling business, and the CEO of the organization was a champion multitasker, and he was very proud of his status as a champion multitasker. The consequence of multitasking for him was he felt like he was getting lots of stuff done. The consequence for the leadership team was they didn't know if they were Arthur or Martha, because he was doing so many things at the same time that it was like, well, which is the focus? Which is the one we need to be putting some energy into? And how do we deal with this? And this is quite frequent in organizations where there isn't clear priorities, there isn't clear focus, there isn't a clear strategy. It's just reactionary because they're in this kind of whack-a-mole status. There's an interesting, also, if we dive a little bit deeper into what is multitasking, it actually comes in three types. There's type number one is where I start something and then I start something else and then I start something else and then I start something else. And I never really get any of them finished because I'm building 7 bridges at once to try and cross a river. And we see this in lots of organizations, that it's just to add another project. And so your speed of productivity is diluted across multiple things. That's not a good idea. The second type of multitasking we see is what we call altitude switching. And this is one that particularly the group of people that we work with really struggle with. So I'm in a board meeting talking about the 3-year strategy, and then I'm in a one-on-one talking about somebody who's late for work, and then I'm going off to brief the CEO on our P&L for the month, and then I'm coming back in because somebody's cat died. And then I've got to go back and work with a cross-functional project for a new implementation of a piece of software. And then I come back to the office and I've got to do some social media comments. And it's this constant altitude switching of strategic to tactical that has a massive cognitive load. So it comes with the cost of the switch, but it also comes with like a hangover effect. There's a switching hangover that you lose about 28 minutes of productivity every time you do it. So we're doing this 30 to 40 times a day in many cases. You're walking down the corridor dealing with something. And I remember, even as a GM, 7 or 8 years ago, I would walk into a meeting having signed off 3 things in the corridor on the way there. And I'd sit down and I'd go, so what's this meeting about? Okay, cool. Put the cassette in my head, off we go. But there was a cost to that. And there was a hangover of all those other things I'd just been thinking of in the corridor, trying to deal with all that at the same time. I wasn't productive. And then our third piece is what we call functional switching. And the functional switching is the switch between being the leader of a team and being on a leadership team. So we see that, and it's 2 very different personalities you wear, right? One is I'm in charge and I'm making decisions and I'm making calls and I'm running operations. And the second one is I'm on a leadership team and we're setting direction and vision and strategy and we're talking as kind of cross-functional experts. And that is, again, a huge cognitive load. So you stack all 3 of those, multitasking, doing lots of things at once, altitude switching and functional switching on top of each other. And you wonder why people are burning out. And you wonder why people are struggling to get the clarity and the productivity that they need because they don't know what's going on. And then they're expected to translate all these little conversations they're having on a daily basis in the masses of time they don't have available to clear briefings for their team. And we wonder why things are broken.
In trying to close the conversation, if I'm listening today to this conversation and I want to go back into an organization that I maybe have a little distance to. So maybe I'm a board member or a higher up level and I want to walk into one of the operating units. What can I look for tomorrow to kind of get a feel how big or how small my fraction problem is? Am I dealing with a small affliction or am I dealing with something that I really need to start addressing? What is real bad and what is probably manageable look like?
If I was an exec or a board member and I was going into a business and I would go, well, what's really going on here? I'd probably choose 3 or 4 people and I'd take them in a room and I'd say, tell me your 3 priorities, what you're doing, what you're working on, and how that's important for our business. And just listen to the answers and look for the patterns in the data. If there are no priorities, or the priorities are tactical, or the priorities are low value, then there's some systemic issues. If people are wide-eyed like a bunny in the headlights, then maybe you've got a psychological safety problem because people don't want to report bad news and they're not giving you the honest answer. If you hear people who say, I don't really know why I'm doing this, we've got a clarity issue across the business. So that it's a very simple solution to go in and just ask some questions and listen for the answers and look for the patterns in the data. And you'll know whether you've got an emergency room status or whether you've got a reasonably healthy environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you've given us enough suggestions and ideas for us to understand what in these answers is good or bad. Yeah. Are good positive signals or negative signals, huh? Jimmy, there is much more you do and you could teach us. If after listening today, people want to reach out to you and find out more about your business and your work, what do they do? Where do they go?
You can go to my website, jblhighperformance.com, and access a wealth of resources. I recommend, again, that friction finder assessment. And if you're a leader who's thinking, well, maybe I'm the bottleneck, maybe I'm the one that's causing some of this friction, we actually have a bottleneck assessment you can take for yourself, which comes with 3 months of coaching as well alongside it, for a very low cost. Well, the assessment is free. The coaching is very low cost, and you get the benefit of an AI coach in your pocket for 3 months. So that's well worth doing as well.
Love it. We all love some Dr. Google self-help solutions, right? To get a feel for things. Thank you so much, Jimmy. As always, all those links are in the show notes. Wherever you picked up this podcast episode, you can find them there. Thank you so much, Jimmy, for joining me on the Business Emergency Room today.
Thanks so much for the invitation. It's been fun to talk.
And thank you for tuning in. I hope to have you back on the next episode. Bye now. That is your discharge papers from the ER for today. If this episode was useful, please share it, subscribe, and leave a review. It will keep this emergency room open for business and makes a big difference for podcasts like mine. I am Maartje van Krieken, and this show is my own from start to finish. Produced by me, polished by the brilliant team at Hivecast. And remember, this ER is always open. Till next time.